I don't know about you, but one of the things that we love to do as a family at Christmas time is to play games. Word games, board games, party games. And over the years, there have been a number of games that we have come to play regularly. Of course, there's Monopoly, everyone's favourite game. We were actually given a Salisbury edition of Monopoly when we moved here, and we thought this was a good way of getting to know some of the local places in Salisbury. So in the Salisbury version, Old Kent Road is the remains of Old Sarum Castle. At Mayfair is the Cathedral. Piccadilly is Wilton House. You feel like they're slightly scraping the barrel when Northumberland Avenue becomes the Salisbury District Hospital. But of course, the problem with Monopoly is that it's really not very Christmassy at all when you think about it. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite, isn't it, of the Christmas spirit. Let me take everything that's yours from you, for myself, and leave you bankrupt. And happy Christmas. And certainly in our family, if half of our children haven't by the end stormed off crying, and the board is not in pieces on the floor, then we're doing pretty well. That's Monopoly. Another game we played is Settlers of Catan. This game is about building medieval settlements and cities through accumulating brick, grain, wood, rock, and wool. Now, what is personally really annoying about this game is that I have never won. I always apply the same tactics, buy a settlement near a port and try and get 2 goods for 1, but these tactics have never worked. I don't really know why I stick with them. You have to get 10 victory points to win. Every time when I play, I'm on about 6 or 7, I'm beginning to fancy myself, and my oldest son tells me he's finished and won. Of course, I'm okay with that, but, it's a little bit annoying. So the other classic Christmas game we play with my wife's family is called Scattergrees. The idea is that you have, say, 15 categories: girl's name, boy's name, town, country, river, shop, bird, book, body part, film, sport, chocolate bar, whatever. And then you choose a letter in the alphabet at random, and then you have 2 minutes to fill in every category with a word beginning with that letter. So if your category is chocolate bar and the letter is M, you go for something like Mars or Milky Way. And if no one gets your word, you get points. Now, it sounds really easy, but there are some big problems with this game. One is that when the pressure is on and the clock is ticking down, my mind goes completely and utterly blank. I know there are many films beginning with the letter E, but right now, all I can think of is Gladiator and The Grinch, and those films do not help me at all. Then there's the problem of choosing categories, which means there's a huge argument before we've even started the game. My sister-in-law always demands we go for body parts, which is incredibly frustrating. She's a doctor. She has a huge advantage. And then, at the end of the game, there's this heated debate about whether that word counted for that category. Does running count as a sport? And certainly in my family, this kind of thing ends with a vote, a year-long grudge, and many tears. Anyway, there's this other game that my children have started playing recently in our house that's caught my attention. Let's call the game Lights Out. This is what happens. They go into the lounge, they close the curtain, they shut the door, they clear the floor, they turn the lights out, and then in the dark, they fight. That's it. That's the game. It's kind of primitive, caveman-like. You might think of it as a children's version of Hunger Games or Game of Thrones, but without the blood, and they absolutely love it. In case you're wondering, I haven't yet joined in, although I'm tempted. And they love it, I think, because there is something thrilling about being in the dark. No one can see us. We can do what we like. And yet at the same time, there's something terrifying about that. No one can see us. We can do what we like. And I want to suggest to you that in some ways, this game is something of a parable for us in our time, in our culture today. And it does relate directly to the Christmas story. Think about this question. What is it like to be in the dark cosmically? Does that thought thrill you or terrify you? I want you to turn in your booklets to page 2 to the reading entitled Isaiah 9, 2-7, because the prophet Isaiah uses this image of light and darkness, which of course we see everywhere at Christmas, to explain the deepest problem in our lives and the greatest solution there is. Look at the beginning sentence. He says this: the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Now, from this passage, what I want to do briefly is point you to two things that help us understand, I think, why the Christmas message really is the best news that you and I have ever heard. And here's the first thing we see. The world we live in is a world of darkness. Now, I don't know whether you believe in God, but I wonder how you feel about it. What does it feel like to think that there is no God, or to think that God is there? For many people today, the idea of God not being there is a thrilling idea. The thought that we can live in a world where the lights are out is attractive to us, because what follows is that, well, we can do what we like. No one can see us. The lights are out. We're free. So the mantra that connects with us is, of course, Elsa's from Frozen: no right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. And that sounds just wonderful to modern ears. In many ways, that's the dominant philosophy of Western thinking, what's been called expressive individualism. Be who you want to be and be it boldly. No right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. And we think, well, finally, we can get rid of religion and God, rules and restrictions. We can be who we want to be. No one can see us. We can do what we like. The lights are off. There is no God. And yet, I wonder if you buy into that. I wonder if you have any doubts about that narrative. Because think about this. Is it really thrilling to live in the dark? No right, no wrong, no rules for me. Is that really a thrilling version of reality, or a thrilling version of freedom? There's a great line from Home Alone 1, everyone's favourite Christmas film, where the two robbers, Harry and Marv, are plotting to come back to 8-year-old Kevin's house at night when it's dark to rob the house. And Marv says to Harry, on the wisdom of coming back at night, yeah, kids are scared of the dark. But Harry says, you're afraid of the dark too, Marv. You know you are. Now, Marv's embarrassed and denies it. No, I'm not. Harry affirms it. Yes, you are. But when you think about that, it's actually not that childish to be scared of the dark, because the dark can be scary and depressing. The people that Isaiah, the prophet, spoke of all those years ago, he said, were living in the land of deep darkness and distress. He said that because of sin, because of sorrow, because of suffering. These were a people who had turned from God's laws, a people who were about to experience the horror of an enemy invasion, a people who had turned from God. They were groping around in the dark when it came to the truth, to reality, to God. The passage beforehand in Isaiah speaks of how they were consulting mediums and spiritists because they had no idea who God was. And so according to the prophet, they were living in the land of deep darkness, of gloom and of distress. And actually, that is the Bible's take on the world that we live in today. The world we live in is a world of darkness, a world of moral darkness, a world of spiritual darkness. And the Bible says there's a darkness out there. There's something wrong with the world. But there's also a darkness in here. There's something wrong with us. We're not the people we should be. The world is not the place it should be. The world we live in is a world of darkness. And perhaps in the last few years, we as a culture are just a tiny bit more open to considering that there might be some truth in that perspective. That things are not necessarily good, that maybe things aren't getting better, that we do live in the dark with Wars and a pandemic and turbulent politics and sex scandals and fake news and environmental fears and the rise of AI, there's perhaps just a little bit more of a sense that the future is not necessarily bright. And some would say part of it is that when you get rid of God, there are some terrifying consequences. Because when you think about it, if you reject God, it is very difficult to see any good reason for there being meaning and purpose and truth and dignity and morality and humanity and rights and justice and hope and peace and everything worth living for. Here's how the atheist historian Yuval Noah Harari put it in his book *Sapiens*. He said, as far as we can tell, from a purely scientific point of view, human life has absolutely no meaning. Humans are the outcome of blind evolutionary processes that operate without goal or purpose. Our actions are not part of some divine cosmic plan. Hence, any meaning that people ascribe to their lives is just a delusion. And that is not a very Christmassy thing to say, but it is the brutal logic of atheism. And he's right. If there is no God, what follows is there is no meaning or goal or purpose or hope. And that is a dark place to be. I wonder if you see that. The world we live in is a world of darkness. And that was the context of the first Christmas too. Here's the second thing. Christmas is about the coming of the light. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. And so into the darkness, the prophet proclaims light. Notice he says, this is a light which brings joy. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. It's like the joy of the harvest or the joy of victory in battle. And this joy bringing light comes from God. It's bound up with his work of bringing freedom and deliverance. Line 4. He says, you've shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. This freedom brings peace. Line 6, every warrior's boot used in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. And so Isaiah speaks of a coming light, which is going to bring joy and freedom and peace. And of course, those concepts resonate with us. We want those things, don't we? Joy and freedom and peace. But then comes the really shocking part. Because he says that the coming light comes through the birth of a baby. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given. And the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And this is where the Christmas message becomes really hard for us to hear. This is where we switch off. Because we're okay with these concepts, joy and peace and freedom and love. But a baby born in history from God, really? The Christmas stories with angels, shepherds and wise men, really? Are we really supposed to believe that? We might think. And we wonder, if God is really there, why can't he make himself known in a more impressive way? Why isn't it more obvious? And yet the Bible insists that if you want to know God, you have to know him on his terms. And to believe in him, God has not given us a knockdown argument or a scientific proof or an amazing miracle. No, the Bible tells us that he's given us a person who comes to be the lowest of all people. And that is the Christian claim, that remarkably, God has written himself into the story of existence. He's not just the author, he's the main protagonist, the central character. The most remarkable thing that has ever happened is that in time, space, and history, the Son of God took on flesh and entered into our experience. He was born in obscurity. He lived in hostility. He died in agony. And though he was rejected by sinful humanity, God raised him from the dead to be Lord and King. This is how Isaiah puts it: of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. And so this is the promise of Christmas, promised years, over 700 years before, that into a world of darkness, the light would come. And through Jesus Christ, God would begin to remake this broken world. He'd be known with these wonderful titles. He'd be known as Wonderful Counselor, because he would lead us into the truth. He'd be known as Mighty God, because he would have power to defeat all our enemies, sin, death, and hell. He'd be known as Everlasting Father, because he would love us with a father-like tenderness. He'd be known as Prince of Peace, because he would go to the cross, and on the cross he would suffer for our sins and bring us peace with God. And of course, there is something deeply offensive about this, because it tells us that we cannot fix ourselves. It tells us that the only hope we have is God. It tells us that we're not the good people that we often claim to be. It tells us that to qualify for Jesus, you need to come with your sin and nothing else. And yet here is the most wonderful thing. If you know that you're in the darkness, that there's a darkness inside that you cannot fix yourself, to be told there is a light which brings life, is the most wonderful thing of all. I don't know if you heard the story of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She grew up in Africa as a Muslim, but rejected it when she left home for Europe. She then embraced atheism. She became known as the fifth horseman of the new atheism. But last year she shocked the watching world by revealing that she had become a Christian. There are quite a lot of strands to her story. But at a very personal level, she found herself at rock bottom, struggling with anxiety, depression, alcohol, and finding very little hope indeed. Her therapist, though, was a blunt lady, and she said to her one day, "Do you know, I think your biggest problem is that you are spiritually bankrupt." And her reaction was to say that she didn't believe in God. In fact, she hated the God that she'd heard of. But a therapist asked her to consider what she would want God to be like. She said, if you could design your own God, tell me, what would he be like? And so she started to think about God and how he might be. She started to describe a perfect God. But in doing so, what she realized was that she wasn't actually designing God at all. She was just describing Jesus Christ. And so she sought him, and she came to know him. And so that is what Christmas is all about. Beyond the lights and presents and festivities and food and board games and arguments and everything else, it's about the joy of coming to know God as your God through Jesus Christ. It's about the joy of forgiveness of sins, the joy of knowing the love of the Father, the joy of being guaranteed a home in heaven. Might be for you, it all sounds a bit like a children's story, God, the snowman, Elf, and the Grinch. And I encourage you to take one of those gospel accounts that are on some of the chairs, to read it for yourself, examine the evidence, consider the claims of Jesus Christ. Now, we've also got a couple of short books that we'd like to give you as a gift. You can get them on the way out. One is called Is Christmas Unbelievable? The other is called Christmas in 3 Words, a further reflection. They're a gift from us to you. We'd love you to think about it. Thank you for listening.